Hey, Will.
Hello, hello.
How's it going?
Well, how are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can
All
hear
right.
you. Yes.
Are we on and live, or
We're
are we?
on. We're on and live. I'll let you take the floor. Okay. This is
All right. Fantastic. First of all, my name is Will Heininger, and I am the Outreach Coordinator for Mental Health at the University of Michigan Depression Center, and also graduated from U of M in 2011 and played football while I was attending school, and that will be part of my story for today. But I want to give a thank you to Scott and Julie Halpert for having me today, and to all of those who have put together such a tremendous program for this event. So without further ado, I want to talk a little bit about my story and how a place like Garrett Space would have and could have been so helpful to really so many individuals. So I have a brief time slot, and I apologize for having to accelerate through some of the details, but when I was 19, finished my freshman year at Michigan and moved home for the summer, and within about a week, I felt like I went from 100 to 0, just like that. And I didn't know what was wrong. I had, at the time, never heard of mental illness, never heard of depression, never heard of anxiety, and it just wasn't talked about. And so I thought that this was a test, a challenge, test of my toughness, similar to like an AP class or a hard workout, something along those lines. And I treated it as such, and as you might imagine, got really, really sick and got diagnosed with major depressive disorder. And eventually, after I stopped hiding it, was actually walked into life-saving help at Michigan football after breaking down at a practice. Got walked into a therapist's office named Barb Hansen, who really changed my life. And I told people for a long time that good medicine and good love and good support, good therapy is what got me better. And I really do believe that in a lot of ways. However, in the years after my time at college and reflecting and looking into other stories and understanding mental health more as a whole, I've come to realize that there was a lot more to my recovery, having experienced depression in adulthood and not having had the exact same types of support, and understanding those differences and how it's harder to get better, getting to why a place like Garrett Space can be so valuable and so healing. So as I continued to get good therapy and get on a medication that would work for me and go to school, starting to build bits of confidence, I realized that there were all these other components of well-being. Not at the time, I didn't understand it, but looking back, I understand it now, that for me came from football and from my life at school. Those being resilience and belonging, connection, purpose, time outdoors, obviously, at practice and physical exercise, eating pretty well, nutrition, and even getting my sleep back in order. And all of these things, these sort of gaps in treatment, in these areas that we can get support, all of these things are currently, in my opinion, areas where there are gaps in treatment, that we have our ambulatory care and we have therapy, and it's great that more and more individuals are embracing therapy and getting the care they need, and that stigma is being reduced so that an individual like myself who experiences major depression or anxiety or any other mental illness is more likely to get help sooner. However, as we go along our healing process, there is sort of this gap between your care and your real life or the rest of your life. And a place like Garrett Space that doesn't feel clinical, that doesn't feel medical, but just feels comfortable, where you can be you and acknowledge the stressors or the things that you've been working on, but not feel so much like this is therapy and the rest of my life is over here, I really think helps bridge that gap back into a life that we like, that we can function in, that we choose to give effort to each day. And so when I learned about Garrett Space, when I understood the mission, it was something that I thought to myself, they just put words to the gaps that I've been noticing in hearing other people's stories of mental illness and treatment and recovery, finding those sort of soft supports, those other legs of the stool, if you will, in addition to therapy and medication and family support. It was hearing those sort of other versions, other types of support, and how key they were to people's stories of recovery. It made me realize, sort of on a holistic well-being level, how important, human connection really is, how important purpose is and belonging, and then also how detrimental it can be if you lack those things, especially in a vulnerable time when dealing with mental illness or trying to climb out of a difficult episode. And so I encourage you, if you are just learning about Garrett Space or you've known a little bit about it, to visit the website to get a little bit more involved. You can contact us at the University of Michigan Depression Center as well. We are working with Garrett Space and also other outreach and educational programs to improve mental health in the community. And on that note, I want to just touch on one of my sort of core beliefs about mental health and society and how we all do our part, which is that I think we all agree that we would be better off as a society if we were, say, this much mentally healthier, each of us on an individual level. And we can relate to the idea that if we were to maybe walk one more lap or get a little bit more exercise each day, we would all be a little bit physically healthier. And what are the things that we can do, as a society to improve our mental well-being on an individual basis, and then therefore on a collective and societal level, and to avoid the types of tragedies and heartache that we see when our brains aren't functioning the way that they're supposed to, and when we are not able to meet our human potential. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys for the time and for listening. Encourage you to find a way to get involved and engaged in mental health in your communities, whether it's on a grassroots level or a more formal level. The more of us that are aware and knowledgeable in reducing stigma about mental health, the more likely we are as a society to get the care we need, to get it earlier. And we know that the earlier we identify mental illness and the earlier we get care and treatment, the better the outcomes are consistently across the board. So thank you guys so much for your time and consideration, and I'll turn it back over to Mario.
Garrett's mom, Julie Halpert, is a family friend, and I joined the advisory board for Garrett Space this year after experiencing my own mental health challenges. And I'm really grateful to have found the local support in Ann Arbor, and I'm really grateful to advocate for its forthcoming residents. And building the Garrett Space Holistic Healing Center and bringing it to fruition will help young adults come back to living fully.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that's such a powerful thing that everybody is dedicating their time to and being a part of. And so you're no exception. So really, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with people. So I guess to start, you know, what is your, you know, where does your journey begin? You know, who are you?
Great. Well, my story with mental health started after I graduated from the University of Michigan, and I finished my architecture degree in 2016. And when I was nearing the end of my college track, I was intuiting that I wanted a career in healthcare, but I really wasn't confident or certain about how to navigate that decision at the end. So I was uncertain about my future and direction and professional goals, and found a mentor in research at the University of Michigan who encouraged me to gain research training. And I found an opportunity to volunteer as a research assistant at a hospital in Portland, Oregon, at the Oregon Health and Sciences University. So a year after graduating from U of M, I relocated to Portland, and then was navigating housing and a new volunteer position. And what I didn't know before moving was exactly what I was going to do in Portland to support myself financially and to know how much income would be needed to be independent in a new city. Yeah.
So you had moved to Portland right then after graduating. I mean, moving anywhere can be a really stressful you know, endeavor for many people. Was there anything else that was happening in Portland at the time that was really hard for you and your mental health?
So I started to doubt myself and lose confidence when I didn't hear back from professional jobs I had applied for. And out of worry, I started to pick up jobs, odd jobs in Portland to support myself, gardening and house sitting. And I worked for UPS, running packages as an assistant deliverer, and worked for a running shoe store. And I could tell that I was starting to digress and deviate from working in healthcare, but it was actually a really good experience to know what I didn't want to do in the long term. And a series of events really stressed my body and mind. And when I was living in Portland, I found a neighborhood and a house in a unsafe neighborhood, and I really compromised my safety by living in a house that had multiple break-ins. And I had the sense that I should be independent and just tough it out and continue to live in this house where I could afford to pay rent. And from the time I moved to Portland in the fall of 2017 to the summer I moved back to Ann Arbor in 2019, I actually did not have a menstrual period. So my body was under a lot of stress, and I had lost 30 pounds by running and being really active in Portland. And then a physician who was providing medical advice sexually assaulted me and put a lot of strain on my body and mind, and that really contributed to PTSD, which I experienced later.
Yeah. So then was this, I mean, it seemed like that was kind of a lot to do in such a short period of time for you there. Were you aware that this was affecting you negatively, or did you have to have people kind of, you know, bring this to light? Did they see something going on in you that was different?
Increasingly, I could tell that that living in solitude in Portland and experiencing break-ins and having several mental health challenges was affecting my mood and mental state negatively. But it took a friend and my family to recognize I was experiencing depression. And when I had shared with a friend that I had been sexually assaulted, she encouraged me to seek a counselor. And this therapist recommended I see a psychiatrist, who I'm still seeing today. And when I moved back to Ann Arbor, I was really reluctant to come back, and I felt like I had failed, and that I was losing my self-efficacy. And
Sure.
And then I started to develop psychotic symptoms. I was having trouble sleeping and experienced flashbacks and was returning to painful experiences. And then I started to have unprecedented visions of wanting to end my life. So I sat down with my family on multiple occasions to ask them to prepare for the worst and really encourage them to take care of their own mental health, because I felt like I was in a lot of pain. But my psychiatrist admitted me to the University of Michigan Psychiatric Hospital, and finding my own psychiatric and mental health support made a huge difference and saved my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. So that, you're very fortunate then to have been under the care of really well-trained individuals, people who knew what they were doing, and furthermore, they allowed you to kind of look at your life a little differently, right? Isn't that kind of where it goes? I mean, can you explain maybe then your diagnosis there while you're there?
Yes. So when I came back to Ann Arbor, it took time to find the right therapist and psychiatrist, and hesitating to seek care was self-defeating. So it took time, and the process of finding someone you trust to take care of you and confide in takes time. So my psychiatrist wasn't sure why I was presenting psychotic symptoms, but I was diagnosed with PTSD and depression. And then later, this last winter, we worked together and I recognized that I was experiencing depression monthly, and I was diagnosed with PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And I've learned that PMDD is treatable, and it's actually more common than I had known, but it's marked by feelings of hopelessness and depression and fatigue around the time of your menstrual cycle. So I still get dips periodically, but I'm taking prescribed medication and working with a psychiatrist and a great support team.
That's great. That's really wonderful to hear. And I guess, through realizing that, you had been diagnosed PMDD or PTSD, I mean, you found out you were not alone in this sense. This was something that wasn't uncommon per se.
Yes, and it's huge to know you're not alone. And I felt a lot of shame and regret. I was apologizing profusely for feeling like that I caused my depression, and I was feeling that I was alone. But medication and reassurance from professionals, which would both be provided through Garrett Space's residential center, would be so beneficial to young adults facing mental health challenges.
Yeah. And so a place like, Garrett Space existing, although the space might not exist in itself yet, the idea of it's bringing people together like you and all these poets and these people who have spoken and performed today. Where do you think now? I mean, you had to go through that. Where are you now with your mental health? Can you tell? Can you feel a difference?
Yeah, so a year ago, my internal dialogue was so dark and negative, and I felt really hopeless, and I didn't have a sense of direction or a sense of purpose. So I felt like I had really let myself down, and now my energy has transformed. I feel really positive, and my life has taken a new direction. My experience moving out of depression has motivated me to pursue a nursing career, and I want to become a nurse to provide structural and spiritual and medical care for patients and improve their quality of life. And I am really grateful for the life I'm living now and to be a part of the Garrett Space team.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. To take something that was, for most of your life, or for the last few parts of your life here, bringing you down and kind of flipping it, and then now you're helping those who might be going through the same thing. That's a really tremendous way to live your life, and I really admire that. That's great. So a place like Garrett Space, when the space is said to actually exist, why would that matter to somebody like you, or how would it be helpful for that younger you?
experiencing depression and suicidal ideation is very tender, and not knowing where to go or feeling stigmatized for admitting that you need help, and also finding the support that your family needs when you're uncertain and unable to respond is unfolding into and Garrett Space is responding to this gap in treatment. And Garrett, Halpert, and I would have really benefited from a holistic healing center like the Garrett Space residence, where we could go, and it complements the Michigan Psychiatric Hospital, which is safe, but it's also very sterile. And in Garrett's spirit, the Garrett Space Center will offer yoga and meditation, psychiatric support, and music therapy, and these will be very conducive to healing and play and creativity and getting back to living fully.
Wow, that's amazing. That's incredible. I mean, what you had to go through, nobody should have to go through something like that. And you've been able to persevere and do this through the help, of others. And it's really incredible that you could just be here today to share the story with us. And we appreciate you. And I guess one last final word here, if you'd like. What's any last words for the people out there? Tell them, what does Corinne Gardner like to say to the world?
Well, thank you so much for listening to my story and my experience with mental health. And I'm really grateful to have discovered Garrett Space when I returned to Ann Arbor. And I would just encourage any listeners, people who may be experiencing depression or feeling isolated, particularly now during COVID, to reach out to friends and know you're not alone, and trust in your emotions. Allow yourself to feel everything.
Here is Nick.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to hand it off to you.
All right, sounds great. So, hello everyone. As I just said, my name is Nick Brdar, and I am so honored and excited to be with you all virtually today. Before I get started, I would just like to take a moment to thank you all for being here right now, especially those of you from back home in California. I know an 8 a.m. wake up on a Saturday morning might not be the ideal way that you want to start your weekend, but thank you. And in all seriousness, thank you all for saying yes. For saying yes, suicide prevention is essential. For saying yes, there are gaps in mental health care that need to be addressed. For saying yes, my life matters, and so does yours. So today I'll be sharing my story with all of you. The story of how I came to the point where I too could agree with that last yes. My life matters. So for some background, I'm originally from California, born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area with my amazing mom and brother. And now I'm back in Ann Arbor, just starting out my junior year at the University of Michigan. I'm majoring in psychology and neuroscience, hope to pursue an MD PhD program in psychiatry after undergrad. Outside of school, I love to go on hikes, spend time with my friend, try out new coffee shops, walk my dog Yogi, who I'm sure is watching back home with my mom right now too. And currently I'm the Director of Program Development for Wolverine Support Network, a student organization on campus that hosts weekly peer-led support groups for students to support their mental health and day-to-day lives. I'm the programming chair for U of M's chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and host presentations to numerous student orgs on campus to bring light to the conversation on suicide. And I'm also a counselor for the Crisis Text Line. So if you couldn't put the pieces together by now, I'm pretty passionate about mental health and always have been this passionate about mental health, but I wasn't always in a place to effectively display this passion. So growing up, I was consistently known as the happiest kid around. I had and still have a huge smile and a huge passion for life. So when I started to lose that internal sense of happiness during the summer before my junior year of high school, I kept that inside and I put on a mask. I put that mask back up. I kept the happiness up. And I was still afraid to reach out because I thought that my entire identity relied on the fact that I was that happy person growing up, that I was the happy Nick. So early in my junior year, my best friend's brother passed away unexpectedly, And in addition to being a really close family friend, this person was also a recent graduate of my high school and was well known throughout our campus. After his passing, our campus suffered a lot of pain and grief. Surprisingly, in addition to the grief I felt, I was also feeling a sense of relief. This was the first time I could openly display my emotions, the emotions besides joy and happiness, to those around me. It was so amazing to be supported by so many loving people. And as my school community moved on in their healing process, I found myself slowly putting up that mask and that facade of happiness. Everyone seemed to be healing just fine, moving on, going to class, but I still felt that profound sense of sadness in my heart. The only difference was that now I didn't feel comfortable sharing it with others or reaching out for support. It was during this time that I had so many emotions built up inside that I just couldn't take it anymore, and one night I just broke down to my mom. I was so frustrated that I wasn't the happy Nick anymore, but opening up to my mom truly was the first step in my mental health recovery process. And unfortunately, it wasn't just smooth sailing from that point on. I went through continuous ups and downs. At home, I felt sad and worthless, unable to get out of bed on the weekends. At school, I could barely focus in class or concentrate on assignments. My grades slipped. Thankfully, I was taking steps toward finding things that supported my mental health, from my school counselor to my close friends, and even finding a therapist and psychiatrist. And again, I found myself feeling worse before I got better. Talking with my therapist started bringing up some old painful memories from the trauma I experienced during a toxic relationship in my childhood. Finding the correct dose of medication with my psychiatrist was just as challenging. I thought I was taking all the right steps, but I wasn't getting better still. At this point, I had little hope and started to experience urges to harm myself or end my life for the first time ever. I was scared at first, but eventually felt comfortable enough to talk to my therapist about this, who helped me find where I could get support should I ever find myself in those headspaces. And eventually, after more ups and downs, I received a primary diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder in addition to the depression and anxiety I've been experiencing. While these diagnoses initially seemed to define me, I found that they actually served as a piece of hope and comfort. I wasn't the only one who'd ever experienced what I was feeling. There was a name to what I was feeling, and I could finally understand the pieces of my life that kind of led me to this point. From in this time feeling sad to overly stressed to distracted to even suicidal, I found some source of hope and comfort in knowing that I wasn't the only one there. And I learned that it was okay to not be okay, to not be that happy Nick all the time. And at the same time, I worked harder than ever to get back to that sense of happiness that I so dearly missed. With all that said, I want to be very clear. It was not easy. Unfortunately, as you're going to see a theme going through this story, there were constant ups and downs. Trying to find a new medication, feeling hopeful, then getting worse and experiencing side effects. Meeting my therapist, making progress, and then relapsing. And over time, I learned to expect that these natural ups and downs of life were a completely normal part of recovery. I learned new ways to celebrate the highs while also figuring out what to do when the lows eventually came along. My mom and a few of my best friends were there for me through all the highs and lows, and I truly cannot thank them enough, because it wasn't easy for them either, and I learned that they valued our relationship enough to stick with me through these battles. I am so grateful to have had people in my life during this time that were willing to brave the storm with me, from talking to them about my days or what happened at school, to even teaching them what to do if I became suicidal and needed immediate help. Without the support I found in them during that time, my current reality would be much, much different. And I imagine a lot of folks viewing this may also be in a similar position of support. So thank you for being the rock. You may feel weak or helpless or even hopeless at times, but your support is so, so necessary and so very appreciated. Thank you. And at a certain point, despite all that support that I so appreciated, I'd had enough of this battle. Despite that support, despite seeing my therapist weekly, and despite the brief periods of improvement I experienced. So on May 13th, 2017, I tried to end my life. It was during the hospital stay after this suicide attempt that I realized I needed something more. I ended up taking a risk and spent 40 days in a residential treatment program across the country in Wisconsin. And I find it funny telling this story in Michigan is a lot different than telling it back home in California. I get a lot of raised eyebrows when I say across the country in Wisconsin here in Michigan. But for me at the time, it was across the country. And here at this treatment program, the combination of cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and experiential therapy were great. It was just what I needed. But most importantly, what I needed during this time, in addition to these therapies, was just the chance to take a break from the normal stressors of life and school and focus on my recovery and focus on my well-being. And this treatment was just what I needed. So 40 days later, I left that treatment center filled with hope. Not a hope that I was better or fixed, but rather a hope that should I ever experience those profound lows again, I would be able to survive them and even learn to thrive through them. And I cannot even begin to express my gratitude for this treatment I received that summer and all of those who helped me through my battle. But with that gratitude comes a very, very stark realization. Without this program, my story would have been much different. Frankly, without this program, my story probably would have already ended. That's why the work being done by Garrett Space is so essential, and I cannot express that enough. Because I consider myself very lucky. I had the resources to be able to fly across the country and receive treatment at a nationally recognized hospital program. If that weren't the case, my story could have ended there. I was 17 at the time, which meant I still qualified to stay in the adolescent program. If that weren't the case, I would have been in the adult treatment program. And let me just tell you something that a lot of people fail to realize in the world of mental health treatment. Adult psychiatry is much different than adolescent psychiatry or even just young adult psychiatry. Don't get me wrong, both are so essential and so necessary, but nothing changed the day I turned 18 to make me ready and feel comfortable to go through treatment with other adults that are upwards of 50 or 60. I needed to be surrounded by peers that truly understood my life circumstances rather than people that were at much different points in their lives and in their journeys. Without being supported by the peers my age I could deeply relate to, my story easily could have ended there. Again, I feel very fortunate that this all worked out for me, but I don't really think that I was somehow more deserving of a treatment program that helped me than some other young adult is or someone who had just turned 18 the day before. And that's why the work at Garrett Space is so important. We need treatment programs specifically for young adults. We need places where folks can just take a break from their chaotic lives and focus on their mental health recovery. We need Garrett Space. Thankfully, my treatment allowed me to continue writing my story, and I hope you all see how Garrett Space will do the same for the stories of so many others like myself. And I'm really excited to still be writing my story and be telling it to you today. I've come a long way from the high school student constantly feeling worthless, not being able to focus in class, and wanting to end my life. Today I stand here as a student of one of the best public universities in the world, working at a research lab under a nationally known neuroscientist and holding leadership positions in many mental health organizations at U of M. And I share these victories along with all the hardships I've experienced to exemplify that even when the darkness comes crashing in, there will always be a glimmer of hope. I share my story so that hopefully I can be that glimmer of hope, peeking through the darkness of someone who is out there, that someone who isn't sure they want to keep writing their story. And I have to be honest and say it's not perfect. I still struggle. Some days my success is finding a new discovery in the research lab, acing an exam, or coming up with a new great idea for a student org on campus. Other days, my success is just getting out of bed and surviving the day. And I've learned that both of these successes are just that, successes. So, thankfully, and with hope I say this, my story is not over. It's a lifelong journey of ups and downs. The only difference, writing my story today, is that I can stand here feeling happy, feeling filled with purpose, and confident that I can overcome whatever struggles are still yet to come, and tell you unequivocally that there is hope and there will always be hope in your story. Thank you.
Wow, Nick, Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I really hope that this inspires others to talk to each other about their mental health challenges and reach out to get help. You are so brave, and I look up to you, and I know the community does so much. So thank you again so much for being here and sharing those beautiful words.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.